Inclusive Art, the podcast with Rebecca Navarro.
Episode 20. Ana Mendieta. I have been working out in nature, exploring the relationship between myself, the earth, and art, using my body as a reference in the creation of the works. I am able to transcend myself in a voluntary submersion and a total identification with nature through my art. I want to express the immediacy of life and the eternity of nature. I use the earth as a canvas and my soul as an instrument.
You are listening. Inclusive Art. Inclusive Art.
My name is Rebecca Navarro. For 5 years, I lived in New York City, studying contemporary art and working in museums like MoMA, visiting exhibits and galleries, studying at the auction house, and giving art tours. I have had the opportunity to meet many artists and to see wonderful works and to witness the art market. In this podcast, I want to share with you information, biographies, interviews, and much more in an attempt to make exclusive art inclusive. Come with me. Ana Mendieta was born in Havana, Cuba on November 18, 1948. Her short life was one of provocation, one of breaking the mold. Her medium was her body, the canvas, earth itself, and she is often connected to the 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water, while also exploring the use of uncommon mediums such as blood, leaves, feathers, and more. Her remarkable works exist within the fields of body art, land art, feminist art, performance art, sculpture, photography, and video art. Ana grew up in Paredes, Cuba. Her family had a house which formed part of her early years. Spending time with cousins, playing outside, being with her abuela, sharing stories, games, meals, was how Ana would spend her time as a child. Separation and displacement was sadly a part of her life when in 1961, with only 12 years of age, she was sent to the United States along with her sister and many other Cuban children as refugees while the Cuban Civil War was happening. While Ana and her older sister, Raquelin, were on the plane, they were sure their life in the US would be one of joy. However, once they arrived, they were sent to an orphanage in Iowa, where they found themselves in a very different environment. Cuba had a history of civil war, so Ana's parents thought it would be only a short period of time that they would be separated. But the months turned to years, and it was years before Ana could go back to Cuba again. This had a profound effect on her art, and she would add elements of homeland, displacement, exile on her work. As she recalled later, I have been carrying out a dialogue between the landscape and the female body. I believe this has been a direct result of my having been torn from my homeland during my adolescence. I am overwhelmed by the feeling of having been cast from the womb. In the late 60s, she was reunited with her mother and younger brother, and in 1979 with her father when they came to the United States. Ana Mendieta attended the University of Iowa, and she obtained her BA and MA in painting. She traveled to Mexico, where she felt a connection to the place and to the people. Mexico was more similar to her native Cuba, and she was able to spend time creating her most known work, the Silueta series, which she began in the early 1970s. In this series, she went outside into nature and used her body, often naked, to create imprints and forms, using her silhouette to mold shapes in the earth, sand, or other natural materials. I strongly recommend that once you finish listening to this podcast, go check out some of Ana's works.
Write us to @Arte Inclusivo Podcast.
Mendieta explored horizontality in art. What does this mean? If you think of a painting, there is a sense of verticality, and you would view it literally in a vertical position. In Mendieta's case, she was using her body. She was laying down on the floor, which meant she was exploring a different point of view called horizontality in art. Artworks connected to the land and the earth are often called land art, a movement that connects the landscape with the artwork, extending artistic possibilities beyond the traditional gallery boundaries into the outside. Throughout her artistic journey, she consistently employed the natural surroundings as settings for her works, such as the Silueta series. As these works were ephemeral sculptures, she utilized photography to keep a record of her works, which we can appreciate today, and which eventually would go into galleries and museums all over the world. By leaving her mark in the land, she was creating a metaphorical return to Mother Earth, a ritualistic homage to a universally generic feminine earth goddess. She was exploring the connection between the body and the landscape, as well as the themes of birth, death, and transformation. Mendieta also played a significant role in the body art movement that originated from the performance art movement. Sometimes absent, sometimes present, her body was a fundamental element of her creations, whether representing the tangible or the spiritual. There is a sense of the primal, the origins of human nature. Observing primitive art, she later created Rupestrian-like sculptures by exploring different ephemeral materials such as soil and sand. Her sculpture called Nileborn is an example of how she was documenting her own body imprinted in the landscape and bringing it into the gallery setting. Mendieta wanted her art to be a part of nature, and nature to be part of her art. In this sense, she created dichotomies, dialogues between feminine body and the environment, magic and reality, nature's life cycles, presence and absence as part of her artistic statement that we must not forget our ancient connection to Earth. She was an environmentalist, an activist. Her contribution to feminist art comes from using, unapologetically, her own feminine body and embracing her own spirit and mysticism. If the body is a temple, she was not afraid to worship her own. She gave proper homage to herself, and by doing so, she elevated femininity to a goddess-like state. Searched deeply into her Cuban roots and utilized materials such as blood and other organic substances such as fire, feathers, soil, rocks, and flowers to reflect her interest in ritualistic practices. She would treat her artwork as a sort of rite, commemorating the cycles of life, death, and rebirth with a feminine point of view. Her character was one of fire, and she will speak her mind freely and express herself with no restraints. She would often disrupt the casual attitude of individuals, provoking them to form more genuine connections, to have people recognize that we are connected to each other and to Earth, the Supreme Mother of all, La Pachamama, nature, La Madre Sagrada.
Write us to @ArteInclusivoPodcast.
She aimed to break down the barriers of apparent distinctions in various aspects, such as gender, race, and geographical location, urging us to recognize our own apathy towards more unsettling issues like bias, prejudice, and violence. In 1979, Air Gallery in New York hosted Ana Mendieta's first solo exhibition of photographs. Due to the unusual and powerful nature of Mendieta's work, the exhibit was a success. According to her niece, Raquel Cecilia Mendieta, who by the way is a filmmaker, writer, and video artist, Ana was a great writer and a poet. Her eloquence and intellect allowed her to speak her artistic vision not only to her artworks, but also to have a critical eye. In 1981, Mendieta curated and wrote the introductory catalog essay for Dialectics of Isolation, an exhibition of third world women artists of the United States, another exhibition held at Air. It showcased the work of Judy Baca, Senga Ngudi, Howardina Pindell, and Sarina. Mendieta wrote in the curatorial statement for this exhibition of women artists of color, "As non-white women, our struggles are twofold. This exhibition points not necessarily to the injustice or incapacity of a society that has not been willing to include us, but more towards a personal will to continue being other. Sadly, Ana Mendieta's life was cut short when she died on September 8 of 1985 at the age of 36 under mysterious circumstances. She fell from her 34th floor apartment in New York City. At the time, she was living in this apartment with her husband, minimalist sculptor Carl Andre. Mendieta's fall occurred following an argument between the couple. Andre was initially charged with her murder, but he was eventually acquitted in 1988. The trial and its outcome sparked debates and discussions within the art world and beyond, raising questions about the nature of the relationship, the events leading up to Mendieta's death, and the legal proceedings. The exact details of what transpired that evening and the events leading up to Mendieta's fall remain unclear, and the case has continued to evoke speculation, emotions, and controversy. Some supporters and advocates for Mendieta's work have expressed skepticism regarding the legal process and Andre's acquittal, while others, particularly inside the art world, have accepted the court's decision.
You are listening.
Inclusive art.
Inclusive art.
There is a podcast I recommend that speaks about Mendieta's death. It is called Death of an Artist, with Helen Molesworth, an art curator. It speaks broadly about the events surrounding Mendieta's death. In a world that favors the white male agenda, I personally have no doubt that Mendieta's death was femicide. Mendieta was a woman of color, a refugee, and she was provoking while she used her artistic voice to talk about violence, feminism, and social issues. She was a champion of the marginalized and keenly expressed her recognition of those considered other bodies, and worked to embrace the idea of humanity as a unified and interconnected entity rather than a collection of disjointed individuals. Despite the uncertainty surrounding her death, Ana Mendieta's artistic legacy has endured and grown in importance over the years. There have been many international museum and gallery retrospectives that commemorate her work, such as the 2004 Earth Body, Sculpture and Performance, organized by the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C., one of the biggest retrospectives of the artist's work held up to the date, which traveled to the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, the Moan Art Center, Iowa, and Miami Art Museum in Florida. The Art Institute of Chicago organized a retrospective in 2011. The Ana Mendieta in Context, Public and Private Work was held by the De La Cruz Collection in Miami in 2012, and many more. Mendieta's splendid work is also featured in many major public and private collections, such as the Salomon Guggenheim Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, the collection of Centre Pompidou in Paris, and the Tate Collection in London. The way I reestablish the bonds that unite me to the universe, it is a return to the maternal source, she would say. Ana Mendieta's life and work remain an important part of the art world's history, and she continues to inspire artists and activists all over the world. Her exploration of the relationship between body, nature, and identity was ahead of her time and has resonated with diverse audiences. She aimed to leave a mark, and she surely did. Mendieta's influence endures. Her essence is present, like an ancient memory, like an inner sense of humanity. If we listen, if we pay attention to the voice of Mother Earth, the mark remains in the images she created, ingrained in the mind, in the collective unconscious, prompting us to contemplate the spiritual, otherworldly, and physical bonds present in our own search for purpose.
The Art Dictionary. Tempera. Tempera is a traditional painting method that has been used for centuries, especially during the medieval and Renaissance periods in Europe.
The word tempera originates from the verb temper, which means to adjust to a desired texture.
It is a type of painting where the manufacturing process involves mixing dry pigments with a binding medium, often egg yolk, to create a mixture that dries relatively quickly. This mixture is then applied to a prepared surface with a layer of plaster to create a smooth and absorbent texture. Tempera paintings are known for their fine details, vibrant colors, and smooth matte finish. This technique requires a high level of skill and precision since it dries quickly, allowing little room for coloring mixing once applied. Artists often build the image with multiple thin layers of paint to achieve the desired colors and effects. While tempera was widely used in the past, it gradually lost popularity with the arrival of oil painting techniques, which allowed for a more flexible and nuanced application. However, it has regained popularity among contemporary artists interested in exploring traditional techniques and materials.
This guided visit has come to an end. This bilingual podcast is researched by me, Rebecca Navarro, and produced by Hermanas a Distancia Producciones. If you like it, subscribe to your preferred platform. You can comment, rate, and share. You can find us on social media at Arte Inclusivo Podcast. We want to hear from you. You can write to us at arteinclusivopodcast@gmail.com. Let's make exclusive art inclusive.
This was Inclusive Art, the podcast with Rebecca Navarro.